Hello, home groups. It's good to resume these home groups. Thank you for taking a break, and I'm glad that you are, again, part of this time of fellowship and for study. And I also know that this round we have a few new people joining us as well. So thank you, welcome. Let's get into our study. We are continuing our work through the 10 Commandments and coming now to the 7th commandment. Seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. When I explain this, I want to do a few things with us here. One, I want to look at the meaning of the commandment. And secondly, the purposes of the commandment. So first, what does the commandment mean? And when we ask that question, I think we get two answers. In the immediate or narrow context of this seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, the commandment prohibits the specific act of unfaithfulness within marriage. In the narrow context, this commandment prohibits the specific act of unfaithfulness within marriage. We find this again emphasized in the Pentateuch, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 20. The narrow context of this commandment is to address marital fidelity. That's the narrow context. Broadly, though, the meaning of this commandment reaches far and wide. It addresses a number of similar sins. In his commentary on the 10 Commandments, J. Dauma writes, quote, "The seventh commandment mentions only one sin, but one that includes a wide range of other similar sins. In fact, this commandment then has its tentacles, we might say, spreading into other areas. Prohibition, for example, of sexual immorality that will appear in later covenant stipulations. It addresses, for example, Leviticus 19, verse 29, prostitution. It addresses in Deuteronomy 22, verse 23, those who are engaged. So the meaning of this commandment has two parts, a narrow meaning and then a broad meaning. The second question, however, I think is the more important question. Building on the meaning of the commandment, what are the purposes of this commandment? And when we ask that question, there are three purposes for this seventh commandment. The first purpose is the seventh commandment is to address the love for the self. Sometimes we think as Christians that we ought not to love ourselves, but to love others. The problem is not a love for ourself, but a disordered love for the self. Jesus himself tells us that the second commandment, love your neighbors as yourselves. The implication is that we are called to love ourselves. So this commandment, first of all, its purpose is to address that love for the self. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that is that the commandment addresses purity in our mind. This is what Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Think about whatever's true, whatever is lovely, whatever is just. So it addresses our purity of mind. It also addresses, secondly, our purity of body. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13, that our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit. It addresses the fruit of the Spirit to be self-controlled. Titus chapter 2, verse 12, the command to be self-controlled because of our salvation from God. In fact, we remember the context for this commandment, which is the response of God's people for their salvation. As they are freed from Egypt, commandments are given as the right way of living as his people. So we respond to God and our salvation by godly living, by holy, pure, clean, self-controlled lives. Now notice this love of self is an entire person. When Jesus references this commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, Jesus shows us the intent is more than just simply actions of immorality, but also thoughts of immorality. So the first purpose of the seventh commandment is to love ourselves rightly in a godly manner. Our heart, our minds, our thoughts. The second purpose of this commandment is to love our neighbor. In Romans chapter 13, Paul lists off a number of these commandments. He includes the seventh commandment, you shall not commit adultery. And after writing a number of these commandments, he says, it is summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is a fulfilling of the law. So this commandment addresses a love for our neighbor. What does that mean? Well, God puts a fence around the marriage bed so that we would show love to our neighbor. And in a marriage, the closest neighbor is our spouse. Someone once said, quote, the command to refrain from adulterous relationships is foundational to the well-ordering of the marriage bond and the promotion of intimacy between husband and wife. As anyone who has seen or been affected by adultery knows, intimacy between married people who are not married to one another is profoundly destructive to the marriage, in many cases dealing irreparable harm to the relationship. End quote. So this commandment not only addresses a right way to love ourselves, but also a right way to love our neighbor, the importance of the marriage bed. Hebrews 13, keep the marriage bed undefiled. So marriage, fidelity, it promotes a stable relationship for building of trust and faithfulness between a husband and wife. To break that trust, it causes deep wounds, not only in themselves, but also their family, their children, their friends. Love of neighbor is not just with our spouse, but the effects of marital infidelity reaches then also into others beyond the home. The ripples of adultery, for example, spread over the waters of our neighbors. So, the first purpose of this commandment is a right ordering of how to love ourselves. The second purpose is a right way to love our neighbors. And the third purpose is love for God. And here I want to look at the example of Joseph in Genesis chapter 39. We read about Joseph's prominence in the kingdom of Egypt. In verse 6 of chapter 39 of Genesis, we are told that here is Joseph, man in high authority, who is also a handsome man. In verse 8, this catches the attention of Potiphar's wife. She desires to sleep with him. In verse 9, Joseph's response was to call such immorality wicked and a, quote, sin against God. She continued to pursue him, Verse 10, verse 12, we know the story that she caught him one day by his garment. And in verse 13, Joseph fled. So here we find a story of a man. Notice, when this temptation came up, he sees it not just as a crime against Potiphar, but also against God. Why is this a crime, a sin against God? Well, the God that we worship reveals himself as a faithful husband of Israel, the bride. And you and I are created in his image, which means that as image bearers, we are called to resemble, to grow in likeness, in the image of the God who himself is a faithful husband. Now we see that faithfulness in God, especially in Jesus Christ. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul writes, gives instructions to husbands and wives. He instructs husbands to love their wives in the example in which Christ loved the church, his bride. And so we grow, we continue that image of God, that likeness as a husband to his bride, the church, by giving ourselves up for her. The purposes of this commandment, then, are the right way to love ourselves, the right way to love our neighbor, and the right way to love our God. Created in his image as the faithful spouse, we reflect his image, we grow in his likeness in our marriages and in our own lives by reflecting and growing in such faithfulness and self-control. Now, in your time together as a home group, there's a number of directions that you can go to. You can, if in the Old Testament, in a scripture study, you might want to spend some time looking at Genesis chapter 39 and the story of Joseph. You may also consider going to Matthew chapter 5, where in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus explains the intent of this seventh commandment. You also may consider looking at an epistle of Paul, Ephesians chapter 5, for example, 22 through 33. Or you can look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 to 20. And since this is a study looking also at our standards, the Confession and the Westminster Larger and Shorter Catechism, the Larger Catechism, you'll want to look at questions 137 to 139, Shorter Catechism, questions 70 to 72. Now, as we conclude, the children, some groups have children with them, I think a few questions that we can ask them. First, children, can you name the seventh commandment? Secondly, another question. How can we keep pure in our heart? With the adults, I want you to pay attention to what is around us and its influence upon us, not only marriage, but also the purity of mind and heart. How can the church promote the goodness and the importance of marriage to our world? All right. Home groups, I pray that your time together would be a blessing to you as you study around God's word, as you also join together in prayer and sing, that you also would grow in Christ-likeness, not only in your marriages, but also in your own lives, so that you might love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and your neighbor as yourselves. God bless.